The corner booth at Millstone Grill had gone quiet in the way booths go quiet when someone has just said something the room was not supposed to hear. A man named Cornelius Webb sat across from his grown son Marcus, and the boy, 21 years old, home from his second year at State, had just asked a question so soft it barely cleared the table. His father did not answer. He set his fork down. He looked once across the room at a woman sitting alone against the far wall, a single cup of coffee in front of her, her purse held tight against her hip like something she had learned not to set down. Then Cornelius Webb stood up. What he did next silenced every conversation in that room. And 3 months later, the woman who had been sitting alone would be the reason the man who owned that building lost everything he had spent 22 years building. But we are not there yet. To understand how it ends, you need to understand how it began. And it began on a Wednesday evening in November, in a mid-sized city in Tennessee, with a widower and his son eating dinner in the only place either of them had wanted to eat for the last 5 years. Clarksville, Tennessee, sits along the Cumberland River, about 50 miles northwest of Nashville, far enough from the city that people there still know their neighbors' names and close enough that they feel the pull of something bigger whenever the wind shifts south. Cornelius Webb had lived in Clarksville for 19 years, long enough to have a regular table at Millstone Grill, long enough to have watched the town grow new buildings around old ones, long enough that the woman at the front desk of his firm greeted him by first name and knew his coffee order without being asked. He was 53 years old. He drove a 4-year-old pickup truck with a cracked passenger side mirror he kept meaning to fix. He wore the same 3 pairs of slacks on rotation, bought from a department store in the middle price range, and he kept his hair cut the same way he had kept it since his 30s, close and clean and unremarkable. The people who passed him on the street on a given Tuesday saw a man of middle age in a sensible coat who did not walk as though the world owed him anything. That was, largely, the effect he was going for. On the dashboard of his truck, between the cup holder and the edge of the windshield, there was a photograph held in place by the vent clip. A woman in a yellow dress, standing outside a church on what looked like a spring morning, laughing at something just outside the frame. He never moved it. He never mentioned it to anyone. It had been there for 6 years, and the sun had faded the yellow to something closer to ivory. He simply left it where it was, the way you leave a lamp on in a room you have not stopped belonging to. Marcus was 21, lean and deliberate, in the way of young men who have grown up watching a careful person and absorbed the habit without meaning to. He had his father's eyes and his mother's mouth, and the particular quiet of someone who had learned early that some silences are more useful than words. He had come home from school for the long Thanksgiving break, and in the way the break always went, they had come to Millstone Grill on the first Wednesday evening as a matter of routine. They had been coming to Millstone on Wednesdays for 5 years, since the year his mother died, and the kitchen at home had stopped feeling like a room either of them wanted to cook in. The diner was not fancy. It had 10 booths, a counter with 6 stools, and a menu that had not changed meaningfully since the previous owner retired and sold it to the current one. The lighting was the color of old honey. The coffee was refilled without asking. Cornelius always ordered the pot roast. Marcus ordered whatever he felt like, which was usually something different each time, as though he was still deciding who he was going to be. He saw the woman first. She was sitting at the two-top against the back wall, the table nearest the restroom hallway, the one nobody chose unless every other seat was taken. The lighting there was poorest. She had positioned herself with her back slightly turned to the room, not dramatically, just enough. Her hair was dark brown and loosely tied, the kind of knot that starts the day neat and surrenders to it by evening. In front of her was a single cup of coffee, no food, no second cup, no menu open. Her coat was still on. Her purse sat pressed between her hip and the wall, not hanging from the chair, not set on the table, held. The coffee had likely gone cold 20 minutes ago, and she was not drinking it. Marcus turned back toward his father and lowered his voice. "She was already there when we pulled in," he said. "I watched through the window before we came in. She hasn't ordered anything." Cornelius did not look right away. He reached for the salt shaker, as though that was the reason his hand had moved, and let his eyes travel past the back table without stopping on it. He saw what his son had seen. He also saw the thing his son had not named. He had seen that look before, not on a stranger. On a face he had known better than his own for 21 years. In a month they did not talk about anymore. He set the salt back down. He turned his fork over once on the table. She might have already eaten, he said. Marcus was quiet for a beat the way he always was before saying something that mattered. She hasn't touched the coffee. Cornelius did not answer that. And here is where the story pauses, because what Cornelius was feeling in that moment is not a feeling that has a simple name. It was not pity. Pity lives at a distance and keeps its hands clean. What Cornelius felt was closer to recognition, the particular discomfort of a man who has seen something true and is now deciding whether seeing it obligates him to do something about it. He had built his whole adult life around a clean, honest principle. Help your own, respect other people's privacy, and do not insert yourself into situations that did not invite you. It was a workable principle. He had run his firm by it for 12 years. He had raised Marcus by it. He had gotten through the hardest years of his life by it. But Marcus was looking at him across the table in the same quiet way he had looked at him since he was a boy, and the woman in the corner had just set her coffee cup down without drinking from it. And some part of Cornelius had already made the decision before the rest of him caught up. He laid his napkin beside his plate. "Wait here," he said. He stood up. He crossed the diner between tables and conversations that went on without noticing him, the country song on the speaker above the kitchen doing its own thing. A couple near the window laughing over something on a shared phone. The smell of pot roast and coffee, and something sweet baking somewhere in back. He moved like a man walking into a meeting he had not fully prepared for but was going to attend anyway. He stopped at a polite distance from her table. She looked up. Up close, her eyes were a tired shade of gray-green, and the wariness that came into them when she saw a stranger approaching was not unfriendly, only practiced. "I'm sorry to bother you," he said. "My name is Cornelius. I'm sitting over there with my son." He gestured without pointing, the kind of gesture that gives direction without demanding attention. Across the room, Marcus gave a single small nod. "We're about to order dinner. We noticed you'd been sitting a while. We'd like to buy you a meal, and we'd like it if you'd come sit with us. You don't have to. But the offer is there." She studied him for a moment. The practiced wariness in her eyes did not drop. It evaluated. "That's kind of you," she said. Her voice was quiet and even. "But I'm fine." Cornelius kept his own voice level. "I'm sure you are." "Then why are you asking?" The question came back quicker than he expected, and with more weight in it than a simple sentence usually carried. He had not prepared for that one. He stood with it for a second. "Because my son asked me to," he said, "and he was right to ask." She glanced past him at Marcus. Marcus did not smile in the way people smile when they want to seem harmless. He just met her eyes. Steadily. Whatever she read in his face was not theater, and whatever it was, it seemed to do something the rest of Cornelius's explanation had not. She looked back at Cornelius. "My name is Renata," she said. "Renata Osley, Renata." He gave one nod. "It's just dinner. You can leave whenever you want." She looked down at the cold coffee, then at the door, then back at him. "I'll pay for my own," she said. Cornelius shook his head. "That's not the offer." Her answer came without hesitation. "It's the only offer I'll take." He almost pushed back. The reflex to insist was right there, trained by years of being the one who resolved things. But Marcus was watching, and something in the steadiness of Renata's voice told him that this was not pride assembled for the moment. It was a line she had drawn on harder ground than a Wednesday night diner. And she was not going to step over it because a stranger in a decent coat asked her to. "All right," he said. "You pay for your own. Come sit with us." She held still for one more second. Then she picked up her purse and stood. She followed him back to the booth. She sat across from Cornelius and the window, with her coat still on, and her purse on her lap and her hands resting neatly on top of it, fingers laced. She looked at the menu the way people look at something they have not allowed themselves to consider in a while. She ordered a bowl of soup and a grilled cheese sandwich, the cheapest hot meal available. Before the waitress had left the table, she had slid a folded $20 bill to the edge of the table. Cornelius saw it. He said nothing. Marcus saw it too, and gave his father a look that said very clearly, "Do not argue. Now, before we go further, there is something worth sitting with here, something the story is already showing us, even if it hasn't said it yet. Most people, when they see someone sitting alone in a corner, do one of two things. They look away, not because they're cruel, but because looking away is easier than deciding. Or they look, and then they do something that is more about themselves than about the person they're trying to help. They rush in, they take over. They make the moment about their own generosity instead of about the other person's dignity. What Cornelius did was neither of those things. He walked over and he let her keep the terms. That distinction is small. It is also everything. The conversation that first evening was careful. Renata answered questions in short sentences. She did not volunteer information. She ate her meal slowly and deliberately, making it last, and when the check came she handed her 20 across the table without ceremony and did not wait for change. She left before they did. A quiet thank you, then her coat buttoned, then the door. Cornelius watched her turn, left out of the parking lot on foot. Marcus waited until she had cleared the window and then said, "She walked here." Cornelius set his napkin down. He understood what his son had said without needing the rest of the sentence. They saw her again 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, in the paint aisle of Hendrick's Hardware on College Street. She was standing with a list in her hand, weighing 2 cans of primer, cheaper brand against cheapest brand, the arithmetic of someone spending money they do not have on a problem they cannot leave unfixed. She looked up when she heard someone stop at the end of the aisle. The recognition in her face came with that same reflexive tightening of her, as though she had been found at something. "Cornelius," she said. He answered Renata. He glanced at the cans and then back. Painting. She set one of the cans back. Bathroom. Water damage. "The property manager gave me a choice between fixing it myself or waiting until spring." Her voice was even, but underneath it he could hear the math. $40 she did not want to spend, so she would not have to spend the next 4 months looking at a water-stained wall. He almost offered to help. He knew people. He could have sent a contractor, charged it to the firm's petty account, and had the job done in a morning. The offer rose in him the way offers do when you are a man accustomed to solving things. He felt it coming, and then he remembered the $20 bill on the edge of the table, and he closed his mouth around it. "That's a good brand," he said instead, nodding at the cheaper can. "I've used it on a couple of properties. Holds up." She looked at him for a beat, weighing whether the comment was kindness or condescension. She decided it was the first. "Thanks," she said. They stood a beat longer than the aisle required. Then Renata said something she had not planned to say. "My father's been sick, Parkinson's. I'm the only one who's close." She did not elaborate. She had placed the sentence between them deliberately, the way you place a single key on a counter to show you have nothing in your hand. He answered, "I'm sorry." It was the only thing that wasn't more than she had asked for. After that, they started running into each other in the ordinary geography of a mid-sized city. The grocery on Riverside Drive, the laundromat 2 blocks from her apartment, the hardware store a second time for a different errand. None of it was planned. But Cornelius began to notice that he did not avoid those parts of town either. Marcus was the one who named it. They were driving home from Millstone one Wednesday, when Marcus reached over and turned the radio down. "You keep finding her," he said. Cornelius kept his eyes on the road. "Small city." Marcus let that sit. "Sure," he said. "Small city. There was no edge in it. Just an observation that asked nothing and said everything." Renata started joining them at Millstone. Not every week, but enough that the waitress, a woman named Carol who had worked there for 11 years, began setting 3 waters when she saw Cornelius and Marcus walk in. Renata always paid for her own. Always. Cornelius stopped offering. He had learned to understand the 20 on the table for what it was. Not stubbornness and not performance, but the price she was paying to sit at the table as herself. He had no right to refund it. She let them in by inches. She told them she worked 2 jobs. Mornings at a dental office where she handled scheduling, evenings cleaning offices for a property management company off Exit 4. She told them her father lived in a small assisted care facility on the east side of town, and that the cost of it had been climbing every year without her income climbing to match. She said these things the way she said everything else, without complaint, as if reciting facts about the weather. She did not tell them how close she had come to losing her apartment in March. But Cornelius, who had spent 12 years reading the spaces between what people said, understood it from a single line about a late fee and the way her hand stopped moving on her coffee cup when she said it. Here is the part of this story where the man makes the mistake that almost ruins everything, and it is worth understanding why he makes it, because it is not a villain's mistake. It is a good man's mistake, which is in some ways harder to explain, and in some ways more dangerous than anything a villain does, because it wears the face of care. Cornelius had grown up the youngest of 3 brothers in a house in Memphis, where his mother worked 2 shifts at a hospital laundry and his father drove a freight route 4 nights a week. He had learned early that you fix what is broken, that you look after the people you have decided to look after, and that the man who can solve a problem and chooses not to is wasting something the world doesn't have enough of. He had built a modest commercial real estate firm on those principles. 12 employees, steady contracts, a reputation in Clarksville for quiet reliability. He balanced his checkbook every Sunday and had not owed anyone a favor in 7 years. Helping was not vanity to him. It was structure. It was how the world held together. And so quietly he began to help. The first thing was the late fee. Renata had mentioned in passing that her property manager had agreed to waive a fee from the previous spring if she stayed current through the end of the year. Cornelius called the management company on a Monday morning. His firm had handled 3 commercial closings in that part of town, and he knew the owner's assistant by name. He paid the fee anonymously, asked them to note it as a goodwill account adjustment, and requested that they not mention where it had come from. The assistant paused, then agreed. He hung up and did not examine what he was feeling too closely. He felt useful. That was enough. The second thing was the job. There was a woman he knew, Pamela Deuced, who ran a regional accounting firm in Clarksville's East Corridor, who had been looking for a part-time office coordinator for months. Cornelius called Pamela on a Tuesday afternoon, described Renata without naming her, and said he thought she would be a strong fit. Pamela asked if there was anything she should know. Cornelius said, "Pay her fairly, treat her like anyone. Don't mention I called." Pamela laughed and said she hadn't heard him sound like that in years. He did not ask what she meant by it. The third thing was the facility. Renata had said almost in passing that the care facility where her father lived was raising its monthly rate in January, and that her father had started talking about moving home so she would not have to keep covering the difference. She said it the way she said everything hard, as a fact, with no visible request attached. Cornelius called the facility's billing office the next morning. He told them he wanted to cover the difference between the old and new rate, anonymously, for a period of 12 months. The billing officer had been doing this long enough to know when not to ask too many questions. The arrangement was made. For a few weeks after that, the 3 of them had dinners that felt easy in a way they hadn't before. Renata came to Millstone with something lighter in her face. She mentioned getting the call from Pamela Deuced's office. She talked about the new schedule, the commute, the way the accounting firm smelled of carpet and printer ink in a way that somehow felt safe. She ate her soup and paid for it herself, and laughed at something Marcus said about his professors, and Cornelius ate his pot roast and told himself. The lightness on her face was the reason he had done what he had done. He told himself that. He chose it. He did not look too hard at the other thing, which was that he had decided, somewhere in the back of his mind where decisions made themselves, that he was going to make things right for Renata Osley, and that he had not once thought to ask her what right looked like to her. Then the facility sent a letter. It arrived on a Thursday, addressed to Renata as the family contact for her father's account. It was a standard quarterly update. Near the bottom, in the paragraph about donor acknowledgments, it mentioned the dollar amount that had been contributed anonymously on her father's behalf. The figure was specific. Renata read it twice at her kitchen table. She sat for a moment with the letter in her hands. She looked at the number again. Then she folded the letter exactly in half and set it beside her coffee mug and looked out the window at the parking lot below her apartment building for a long time without moving. She did not call. She came to Millstone on Friday the way she always did now, but she came earlier than usual. She was already in the booth when Cornelius and Marcus walked in. Cornelius saw her face when he was still 10 feet from the table. He knew before he sat down. He knew before she placed the folded letter on the table between them. She looked at him. Her voice did not rise. "I want to ask you something, and I want a straight answer." He set his keys on the table. "All right." She tapped the letter once. "Was this you?" He looked at the folded paper, he thought, for the fraction of a second that a man has before the moment passes, about saying no. The fraction was long enough. She watched it pass. Yes, he said. She gave a slow nod, the nod of someone who already knew but wanted it said plainly. The late fee. March, he answered. Yes, she kept going in the same even voice. The job at the accounting firm. I made a call, he said. She made the decision. The work has been yours. But I wouldn't have been in the room. He had no answer for that. She looked at Marcus for a moment. Something in her face softened and then closed. She looked back at Cornelius. I told you the first night that I would pay for my own. Do you remember that? I remember. Her voice stayed even. I told you what the terms were. And you decided the terms didn't apply to the parts of my life I wasn't watching. He said the only thing a man in that position ever says. I was trying to help. She answered without raising her voice. I know. That's what makes it worse. She picked up her purse. She slid out of the booth. She stood at the end of it and looked not at him but at the window, at the darkened parking lot beyond. You didn't give me a meal, she said. You wrote a story about me where I was the person who needed saving, and you cast yourself as the one who did it. And the worst part is I didn't even get to read it before everyone else already had. He said her name. She shook her head once, small and final before the second syllable. I was already doing it, Cornelius. I was already handling it, slowly and on my own terms. And every time you stepped in without asking, you took a little of that from me. You didn't see it as taking, I understand that. But it cost you nothing, and it cost me something I can't name exactly and can't get back. She did not slam the door. The diner kept going around them. Carol refilled someone's coffee at the counter. The song on the speaker moved into the next verse. Marcus looked at his father across the table, and for the first time since Marcus had been old enough to look at his father like that, Cornelius could not read what he saw in his son's face. He looked down at his own hands. They were resting on the table the way Renata's hands had rested that first night, neatly, as if holding something that was no longer there. Now the story has to turn, because this is the moment that separates a lesson from a mistake. A mistake is something you regret. A lesson is something you change because of. Cornelius Webb was a man who had spent his whole adult life being competent. What he had not understood, until Renata said it out loud over a folded letter in a Wednesday night diner, was that competence applied to another person, without consent, is not help. It is substitution. You are not filling the gap in their life. You are filling the gap in your own, the one left by your own helplessness. And the person you are doing it to is left without even the gap, which was theirs to fill, which was where their strength was living. The drive home was long and quiet. Marcus waited until they were almost to their street. Dad, his voice was level. Did you help her, or did you make her feel smaller? Cornelius did not answer out loud. The question was not built for an out-loud answer. He carried it home. He carried it into the kitchen and sat at the table in the dark and thought about his wife, about the last year of her illness, about how he had taken over everything, every appointment, every form, every decision the house required, and how she had let him because she was tired and because she trusted him. He thought about something she had said once near the end, almost offhand. The kind of thing people say when they are too exhausted to protect you from the truth. She had said, "You are so good at managing things. Sometimes I can't tell anymore which parts of this life are mine." He had thought she was telling him he was doing well. He sat in the dark kitchen and understood, for the first time, that she was telling him something else. He did not call Renata. He did not drive past the laundromat. He went to Millstone only with Marcus, and they ate in the booth by the window without saying her name. And Carol the waitress asked once if their friend was coming, and Cornelius said not tonight, and she did not ask again. He found the quiet at the table harder than he had expected. What he did instead was something quieter than anything he had done before. He called Pamela Doust. He told her the truth, that he had asked her to interview Renata as a favor, and that he wanted Pamela to know that, in case the arrangement ever needed to be unwound. Pamela listened, and then she said, "Cornelius, she's the best person I've hired in 4 years. Whatever got her in the door, she walked through it herself. The job is hers." He thanked her. He sat at his desk for a long time after hanging up. He called the billing office at the care facility and asked them to discontinue the contribution at the end of the current month and to send no further letters referencing a private donor. He called the property management company and told them that if Renata's account ever required attention in the future, they were to contact her directly. and only call him if she herself provided his number. The property manager, a tired man who had been in the business for 20 years and had heard most things, said he had not previously received a call from someone asking to have a favor taken back. Cornelius said he had not previously had a reason to make one. He did not tell Renata any of this. He understood finally that confession was not the point. Telling her what he had undone would be one more act performed without her asking for it. The point was to stop standing where he had been standing. But here is the part of the story that requires us to back up. Because while Cornelius was sitting with what he had done, something else was already in motion, and Renata had not chosen it, and it would find her regardless of whether she wanted it. The man who owned Renata's apartment building, the entire block of it, 12 units, was a man named Gerald Fitch. He was 58, third-generation Clarksville, the kind of man who had inherited enough to be comfortable and had spent 30 years mistaking comfort for merit. He sat on 2 local civic boards and sponsored the Little League team in the South District and had a framed photograph in his office of himself shaking hands with the county mayor at a ribbon cutting in 2019. He was not malicious in the way that cartoon villains are malicious. He was simply a man who had never been asked to look at anyone the way Elijah had looked at Renata through the window of a diner. He had never been given reason to try. Fitch managed his properties through a company called Meridian Residential Group. 3 employees, an office on 3rd Street, a system built on the principle that properties were assets and tenants were liabilities. He had known Renata's name for 3 years the way he knew all his tenant names, as a signature on a check that arrived on time or did not. When it did not, the late fee was assessed automatically by the same system that sent birthday messages to clients of his other business interests. In October, he had signed papers to sell the block of 12 units. The buyer was a development group out of Nashville. The plan, once the sale cleared, was to rezone and build mixed-use retail. Standard practice. 12 tenants would receive 60-day notices. Standard practice. Fitch had told his property manager to hold the notices until the sale cleared, which it did on a Tuesday morning in late November. The same Tuesday morning, as it happened, that Cornelius was sitting at his desk with the phone in his hand, having just canceled an arrangement he had made without permission. The notice arrived at Renata's apartment on a Thursday. She read it at 7:22 in the morning before her shift at the dental office. She read it once. She set it on the counter. She poured her coffee. She read it again. She did not call anyone. She went to work. She did not tell Cornelius. She did not mention it at Millstone the following Wednesday when she came back for the first time since the night with the letter. She had come because enough time had passed and because she had decided, in the practical and unceremonious way she decided most things, that she was not going to let one man's bad judgment deprive her of the only dinner table she enjoyed. She paid for her own meal. Cornelius did not argue. They talked about Marcus's semester. They talked about the weather turning cold along the river. They did not talk about the 60-day notice on her kitchen counter. She had already started looking. 2 rooms on the south side, $940 a month, and a landlord who required first and last and a deposit before the key. She had done the arithmetic 3 times on the back of an envelope. It was doable. It was tight. She had been tight before. But what Fitch's sale had done, apart from the money problem, was cut her commute to the dental office from 7 minutes to 22. And the laundromat she used, the one closest to the new place, closed at 9, which meant she could not use it after her evening cleaning shift. She was solving all of this in order, the way she solved everything, by herself, in silence. Marcus found out the way young men find out things in small cities, through someone who knew someone whose cousin worked at the county assessor's office and had heard about the Meridian sale and had mentioned it in passing to a friend. He came to his father on a Saturday morning while Cornelius was sitting at the kitchen table with the newspaper and told him what he had heard. Cornelius put the paper down. He looked at his coffee for a moment. He did not say anything. Marcus sat down across from him. "I'm not asking you to do anything," Marcus said. "I'm just telling you what I know." His father nodded. They sat there together for a while without either of them speaking. This time, Cornelius did not call anyone. He looked up the public record of Fitch's sale himself. He looked up Meridian Residential Group. He looked up Gerald Fitch. And then, because he had spent 12 years in commercial real estate and understood how development projects worked and how they could be legally contested, he made 2 calls. Not to help Renata. Not specifically. He called the Clarksville Tenant Legal Aid Coalition, which operated out of a church office on Madison Street and provided free consultations to renters facing displacement. He called and made a donation large enough to fund 2 months of additional staff hours. Then he called a woman he knew at the Clarksville Courier-Journal, a reporter named Sandra Holt, who had covered local development issues for 6 years. He did not mention Renata. He mentioned that the Meridian sale affected 12 tenants and that 2 of them had told the management company they did not understand the notice. He did not tell Sandra what to do with that. He simply told her what he knew. Then he stopped. He waited. He did not call Renata. Sandra Holt ran the story 11 days later. It was a careful piece, 3 columns, front of the local section. It covered the Meridian sale, the displacement of 12 families, the 60-day notice timeline, and one particular fact that Sandra had turned up in her research. Meridian Residential Group had been cited by the State Housing Authority for incomplete maintenance records on 2 of its 12 units, and the citations had been filed and then quietly withdrawn after a board member made a phone call that Sandra had also sourced and printed. Fitch was named. The board member was named. The phone call was documented. The story ran on a Wednesday. By Thursday afternoon, the County Housing Board had opened an inquiry. By Friday, 2 of the civic boards on which Fitch sat had released brief statements of concern. On Saturday morning, Fitch's lawyer called the Courier-Journal and requested a correction. Sandra had her documentation. There was no correction to issue. What happened faster than any of them had anticipated. The Nashville Development Group, watching the Housing Board inquiry and the press attention, put the sale on pause pending the outcome. Fitch, who had structured the sale to cover a separate loan that was coming due, found himself without the liquidity he needed. He called in 3 favors. 2 of them went unreturned. The third came back with a no. He lasted 4 more weeks, sold the block to a different buyer, a local property management cooperative that had been operating in Clarksville for 8 years and had a reputation, documented in 3 separate Courier-Journal pieces, for working with tenants rather than against them. The new management company introduced itself to all 12 tenants by letter. The letter included a 90-day rate hold and an invitation to meet with the new management team. Renata received hers on a Thursday and read it at the kitchen counter where the 60-day notice had once sat. She stood there for a moment. Then she folded it neatly and put it in the kitchen drawer where she kept documents she needed to keep. She did not know about Cornelius's call to Sandra. She did not know about the donation to the Tenant Legal Coalition. She found out 6 months later, from Sandra Holt herself, at an event at the city library, where Sandra was speaking about local housing journalism. Renata had gone because the dental office had closed early and the library was 2 blocks away. Sandra mentioned, during the Q&A, that the Meridian story had started with a tip from a commercial real estate contact, and that the contact had specifically asked not to be thanked because the help they had given was, in their words, information only, not a rescue. Just a phone call to someone who already knew what to do with it. Renata stood in the library lobby for a moment after the talk. Then she went home. She sat at her kitchen table. She thought for a long time. Then she took out her phone and found Cornelius's number and typed a single message. It said, "I heard about Sandra. I want to say something, and I'd rather say it in person. Millstone, Wednesday. If you're willing." He was there first. He was already in the booth when she came in. He had ordered coffee and the pot roast out of pure habit, and his hands were wrapped around his mug, and he was looking out at the parking lot when she walked in. She came and sat across from him and did not take her coat off right away. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. "I know what you did," she said. "And I know what you didn't do." He waited. "You called a reporter and gave her a story. You didn't fix it. You pointed at it and let someone qualified handle it." He said, "She did the work, not me." Renata nodded. "I know, that's why I'm here." She took her coat off. She looked at the menu even though she already knew what she was going to order. "There's a difference," she said, "between someone who sees a problem and decides they're the solution, and someone who sees a problem and finds the right room to put it in." She looked up from the menu. "You found the right room. That's different," he said. "I got it wrong the first time," she answered. "You did. But you stopped." A pause. Most people don't stop, she said. They double down because the doubling down feels like caring. She picked up her coffee. Stopping is harder, she said. Stopping takes something. As for Gerald Fitch, the Housing Board inquiry concluded in the spring with a formal finding that Meridian Residential Group had engaged in improper maintenance record practices, affecting tenant safety on 2 of its 12 units. Fitch was assessed a civil penalty of $47,300, which he paid through his personal account because the firm's account had been drained by the failed sale. The 2 civic boards on which he had sat declined to renew his appointments at their annual reviews. His lawyer sent a brief public statement to the Courier-Journal saying that Fitch denied any intentional wrongdoing and believed the inquiry had been politically motivated. Sandra Holt published the statement in full, 1 paragraph, near the bottom of the follow-up piece, beneath 5 paragraphs of documented fact. The statement looked exactly as small as it was. Fitch did not apologize. He was not the kind of man who apologized. He was the kind of man who, when he found himself standing on the wrong side of a consequence he had not foreseen, searched immediately for someone else to hold responsible for his standing there. He found no one. Every person he called either did not answer or answered and had nothing useful to offer. He sat in his office on a Thursday afternoon in April with the civic boards gone, and the sale unwound and the penalty paid, and he looked at the framed photograph on his wall, himself and the county mayor, smiling at the ribbon cutting, and the photograph looked, in a way he could not explain and would not try to, like something from someone else's life. He kept the photograph on the wall. Men like Gerald Fitch always kept the photograph. It was almost a year after the first Wednesday evening that the 3 of them were back in the same booth by the window. The Cumberland River would have been cold that night, running dark and fast beyond the hill at the edge of town. The diner was warm and busy and smelled the way it always smelled of coffee and something sweet from the kitchen. Carol refilled their water without being asked. Renata had arrived with her coat unbuttoned, which she had not done in the early weeks. Her purse was on the bench beside her instead of on her lap. Small things. The kind of things that no one marks as significant at the time and that later turn out to have been the whole story. A woman came in alone at 7:40. She took the 2 top by the back wall, the one near the restroom hallway, the one nobody chose unless every other seat was taken. The lighting there was poorest. She kept her coat on. Her purse pressed against her hip. She ordered a cup of coffee and nothing else. Marcus saw her first. He looked at his father and did not lower his voice. "Dad," he said, "can she eat with us?" Cornelius looked at the woman. He looked at Renata sitting across from him with her own meal in front of her. He saw that Renata had already noticed. She was watching the woman the way you watch a thing you recognize from the inside, the shape of it being familiar in a way that has nothing to do with the outside. Renata picked up her coffee. She held it with both hands. She said, "Let's go ask her, all 3 of us." Cornelius looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at his father. Something moved between them in the way things moved between people who had shared enough to stop explaining themselves. They stood up together. They did not cross the room with an offer already made. They brought nothing but the walk. When the woman looked up at the end of the approach, careful and tired and measuring in the way Renata recognized, it was Renata who spoke first. Her voice was quiet and even and did not carry any of the weight that charity puts in a sentence. "There's room at our table," she said, "if you'd like company. You order what you want. You pay for what you order. That's the whole deal." The woman looked at the 3 of them. She looked at Renata longest. Whatever she saw in Renata's face was not pity and was not performance and was not the shape of someone reaching down. It was the shape of someone holding a door open from the same floor. After a long moment, she nodded. She picked up her coffee and stood, and she came. There is a thing that stories like this one are sometimes expected to teach, and the teaching usually goes something like, "Be kind to strangers, you never know what they're going through." And that is true. But it is not quite the lesson this story is carrying. The lesson is something smaller and harder and more specific than that. It is about the distance between a hand that reaches down and a hand that reaches across. A hand that reaches down can carry food and money and good intentions, and it often does, and the food is real, and the money is real, and the intention is not in question. But a hand that reaches down always carries one other thing with it, every time, without exception. The weight of the distance between the one above and the one below. A hand that reaches across carries only the offer. It does not carry the distance. It does not carry the implication that one person knows better than another what that person's life requires. It says simply, I see you, I have room, here is the door, the terms are yours. Renata Osley had been surviving her life for years when Cornelius Webb walked across a diner floor and stood at a polite distance from her table. She had been doing it carefully and on her own terms and with a clear-eyed accounting of what she had and what she needed and what she would not accept. What she had needed was not a man to smooth the road in front of her without telling her. What she had needed was someone to sit across from her and not flinch. To be, as she had asked him, once the rest was settled, simply a person she saw sometimes. The people in our lives who are carrying things are not waiting to be rescued. They are usually already in the middle of the rescue. They are already working it out, already solving it, already moving piece by careful piece towards something they can live with. What they are waiting for, if they are waiting for anything, is someone who will sit at the same table, as an equal, and let them keep the slow, hard, necessary labor of authoring their own lives. If we can learn to be that person, even once, even imperfectly, even after having gotten it badly wrong the first time and needing a year to understand why, we will have given someone something far rarer than a solution. We will have given them recognition, and in a world that so often mistakes management for love, recognition may be the most honest thing we ever offer another human being. If this story stayed with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed someone being underestimated, only to discover who they really were? Or have you been on either side of this, the one who tried to help too much, or the one who needed to be seen rather than saved? Share your story below. And if you want more stories like this, stories about ordinary people navigating the hard human work of dignity and connection, hit that subscribe button. I'll see you in the next one.